Welcome to The Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a show that is a central hub and safe space for authors to share their stories. The Bold Book with Dr. Denise begins now.
Hello, my name is Dr. Denise Nicholson, and this podcast is for anyone looking for inspiration. Today, I have with me Iannone. Please welcome him, listen to him. This is a pivotal time in our history of this country, and he has a wonderful book, very informative, and I can't wait for you guys to hear his perspective and for you to stretch your mind a little bit and think. Welcome, Dr. Iannone.
Thank
How
you.
are you?
I'm great, and I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Oh my goodness. I'm grateful because this is so important. It's a wonderful time in our history, but it's also, the crossroads. So I wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself and then tell me, please, a little bit about your book.
I would be delighted to do that. I grew up in the Ohio Valley, across the river from Wheeling, West Virginia. And for many years, that area was really coal and steel country. And I lived there until I graduated high school, and I hopped on a Greyhound bus, went to Tucson, Arizona, spent the first 3 years of college at the University of Arizona, came back to Ohio. I've been in the Cleveland area since 1972, and my life has just evolved as I've followed my curiosity through life, and here I am today.
Beautiful. Now, what led you to write this book? Let's jump right into it because it's so important.
I spent 4 decades working in economic development and public policy. And from that, spent a great deal of time trying to help communities, help businesses to basically deal with the whole problem of economic and social mobility through economic development, job creation, trying to retain and expand businesses. So I was the strategist. And from that, I observed the fact that economic development has everything to do with making the American dream possible to Americans. And I saw it back then, and it just seemed the time to write the book was now, given the upcoming election.
Yes.
So that was really the signal, Don, it's time.
Wow. And the book is America's Dream at a Crossroad. It's the perfect name, perfect choice, because of course we are at a crossroad. But what are we on the verge of? Can you explain? Because there are many people who are out here and do not really understand what's going on right now in our country. Please explain to us what is at the crossroads here.
So I tend to look at things in systems terms. I like to see the interconnection of things that often we miss, especially when we look at things from the standpoint of the political extremes, whether you're on the right or the left or even in the middle. So I tend to be most interested in looking at politics as a system. And I think my biggest concern is that American way of government, that is democracy, is really being severely threatened. And in that sense, the American dream is really on the brink. And so we really need to honor the dream. And instead of think, which candidate do we want to vote for, we need to think about how are we going to make America work again for everybody. Yes. And that's what this book is all about.
So what pathway are we willing to let this country take in this crossroads?
Well, the path that we're on right now is one that I think probably most Americans, and even if you looked around the world, you mentioned that you were from Jamaica, right?
Yes, I am from Jamaica.
So, once you step off our continental shores, there's some incredibly different and diverse views of what America is all about today. But I think that most people have a deep concern that, we tend to see politics as a blood sport, and we tend to see compromise as something that we have to avoid, which when we put those two things together, we're really undermining democracy. And democracy is what makes this country great. And it's what separates us from a lot of other countries around the world. So my my assessment of the path that we're on is not so good, but not in the sense of being an alarmist, but I like to see this as a call. My book is a call to action.
Okay.
And I see the necessity of changing how government works. And I think accountability and transparency is important. And I think we need to rebuild government in many ways so that it is more inclusive,
yes,
it's more equitable, and it is more oriented to the needs that people have across the spectrum, not just building a system that allows us to continue to nourish the dreams of the 1% that represent 33% of the net wealth in America. And admittedly, that 1% also pays 46% of the federal individual income taxes. So they have a huge amount of control over what happens for everybody else. And I think that one of the things that we've allowed to happen is that we've created a government that basically serves a few and does not serve the whole of who we are.
You know, I've been doing a lot of listening and just taking note. And because we have so many other things going on, it's easy for us to get distracted with what's really important for us and for our future. Because, okay, so we've had this democratic stability and we've lived it, and now we have our children and our grandchildren who we hope will have the same. And so for us, for me, I've been, doing a lot of reading and thinking and watching others and seeing what's going on and what do I need to do. I know that your book presents a 12-point strategy to prevent the systemic collapse of America's political system. Can you highlight a few of those key points from this strategy?
Certainly. I think at the top of the list, we really have to create a system of government and elected officials that are more accountable. And we need to see the evidence that they are accountable. And right now, that does not exist. And it's not just the executive branch or the White House. It also is true for Congress, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So I have a perspective that says, as a system, we don't have the checks and balances that we need in place. So accountability really is at the top, transparency. And I have to tell you, that's really hard in today's age because of the disinformation, the misinformation, all the different messages that everybody has to deal with, whether you tune into CNN or, whatever your channel of choice is in terms of network news, you're bombarded by messages, and it's really hard to sort all this out. So transparency is very difficult. But I also have a bit of a fiscal conservative perspective, and I think we have to find a way to get this $35 trillion debt down. It's astronomical. And when you look at, the $700 billion a year that we have to pay in interest on that debt, and the debt continues to grow, there's something fundamentally wrong with how we see financial and economic reality. So those are a couple things that stand out.
Right.
I certainly believe, and I believe we need a third-party political candidate, a legitimate one that has the influence that Ross Perot had several years back.
Yes.
Where he basically had 20% of the vote.
But in our system, I don't think that can really work for us, right? Because the electoral I don't want to mess this up, but yeah. I know that we have delegates that get certain amount of electoral votes, and so how do we really support a third party when we know it will be unsure of them being elected, or is that in the future?
I think that's an excellent point. Right now, independents are recognized on the ballot, you're right that the preponderance of the delegates are either Republican or Democrat. But when you look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he could potentially get anywhere 8 to 10% of the vote. And he may get that in certain swing states that are very critical to whoever the two. What's really interesting is we think we know the candidates, but in reality, we don't know who the candidates are until we have these national conventions. The Republican convention is coming up next week, and in August, the Democratic convention is coming up. But people can basically stand up for the independent party. It's not well organized. It's not well funded. So you're absolutely right that they're not on a level playing field with the two dominant parties. So you're absolutely correct with that. And we need to change that.
So I would love for that conversation to be more of a national conversation, because it's so important for us not to be gridlocked and for us to really have power. And the way it is set up right now, we're realizing we don't have power. We, the people.
Well, the term empowerment means a lot to me, and I'm sure it does to you too.
Absolutely.
We need to be, our governmental system, and that doesn't just include the federal, but the state and local, needs to empower people, yes, as opposed to basically drawing power away from them and allowing our elected officials to become celebrities, which is another issue that I take on in my book. We have celebrity politicians. The most pronounced example of that is Donald Trump. And I'm very fair in the book in how I treat, all three of the candidates that we see before us. Mm-hmm. But I think that, even members of Congress that have been in place so long, they become celebrities. And it's just like we vote for judges just by name, whatever the name is. It's been a prominent family name in the judicial system in our states, whether it's New York State or Ohio. Frankly, we basically conduct, our voting in that way, as opposed to really seeing it as what candidate is really going to empower us, that's going to propel us along the American dream that we have in our heart. Yes. You used the word bold. My book is bold. You know why my book is bold? It is bold because it basically calls things for what they are. And when I say systemic political collapse, I mean that.
Yes.
So, we don't have to look very far to see that. And I also say that we've got to make and remake the American dream. And I said this earlier: inclusive, equitable, accessible to all. I worked on a project with the International Economic Development Council going back about 4 years ago. And it was all about how do we you used the term paradigm shift. How do we shift economic development so that we're really practicing economic development at the local, state, and national level to be more inclusive?
Yeah.
Truly more inclusive, not just, okay, we're going to create a program for minorities over here. We're going to create a program here for women. That's not good enough. We're not inclusive. We're not really dealing with the systemic issues. And to me, that's what economic development needs to embrace. And economic development has everything to do with the American dream.
Why do we fight economic development so hard, do you think?
Well, I think economic development is subject to the same things that we see in the political system. It's basically the most wealthy and the most powerful people in every community have the greatest say and the greatest control over what happens. And I think that that's true if you looked at the biggest. I've worked, by the way, I've worked in 32 states, 10 countries, and on 10 Indian reservations in my career. And I see the American dream, in some cases, doing much better than expected. In other cases, doing terribly. My wife came from East Cleveland, Ohio, which is eastern suburb of Cleveland. Used to be one of the finest suburbs. But because of the way that, the problems of how we handled all the changes demographically in Cleveland, how we didn't handle the whole issue of schools and integration as opposed to segregation and all these things, we ended up with a community that basically turned poor, that turned from being about 6% African American to being almost 90% in a decade. And it was just because people were fleeing the city of Cleveland, and that was the most accessible place. But everything was out of balance. We just didn't have the right kinds of tools in place, and we just, commercial realtors basically, were trying to get people to move. It was white flight, get them out of East Cleveland. We'll move them to Cleveland Heights or another community, and they make money every time somebody moves. That's not right. That's not the way to do economic development. It's not right to take one community that is well established and set it aside, pretend it doesn't exist, and look at growth as something new, a new frontier. We'll move to the next suburb, exurban areas, the rural areas. And so that's where economic development has failed in so many ways, Denise.
Wow. So much to unpack there. I know. I know this conversation is limited to 45 minutes. So yeah. Can you explain, in your book, you talked about zero sum or win-lose political system to a positive sum, the win-win approach. Please explain.
Well, I think as we think about our interests, and this is where compromise and the ability to negotiate and find solutions that work for everybody, as opposed to just, well, those that have the most wealth and power are basically going to dictate. So that's a built-in win-lose system of politics, and so the game that we're playing today is win-lose in terms of the right and the left of the political system, and so the middle has been eliminated. So we've disempowered everybody that falls between those two extremes. But how do you create a positive sum society? It's not going to happen overnight. But you see, I believe that's the bold thing I plan to do with this book.
Yeah,
is that I plan to work this, and I plan to go out and give presentations and speeches and work in trying to help people find this in local communities, and I think that's the key thing.
Yeah.
But when we continue to just see the us versus them perspective of anything, we've lost sight of what the positive sum game is.
Yeah. It's so important that each of us listen to what's going on right now and really look at how it's impacting our now, but how it will impact future generation. And if you're only looking for your party or staying strong to your party instead of looking for, my goodness, this is our future. This is the future that I am participating and leaving for our children, our grandchildren, and the future. Then we have a responsibility. It's more than just a vote right now. It's a responsibility. So thank you for writing this book and for doing the work to go out there and share it so that people could start to think deeper about where this country is going and how their vote is a participation in, do we go left or do we go right? This is the crossroads. Where do we go? But you have to educate yourself and see why it's important. So thank you. Thank you so much. Your book is written from a moderate conservative perspective. How do you address and incorporate views from across the political spectrum?
Well, I think it's kind of I'm kind of in the middle. That's where I've been all along. When I look at my career, working in all these states, 32 states, I worked in red states, blue states, and what I've provided in terms of strategy and policy analysis and helping people put things into work, whether it's new entrepreneurial programs, whether it's technological innovation, whether it's workforce training, I've been able to do this either red or blue. And so I think that we have to really be able to do that. But I think we're also going to have to work very hard at going back to this whole idea that we were talking about earlier in terms of positive sum. See things as a system and approach them, in terms of solutions from a system standpoint. Another thing that actually was pretty bold about my career, I stepped out of economic development as a consultant and doing all this work in 2016. And I basically said I wanted to go back and teach. So I've been teaching business students. My business students, they're all graduate level students. They are from Ghana. They are from Malta. They are from Saudi Arabia. They are from various other countries around the world. And it's all online, education through Transcontinental University. But I decided I really need to go back to teaching and writing. And those are the two things that my career and my life really are about. I mean, my life is about my family, my two sons, my wife, my grandsons, and, friends. But when I look at really how I use my life force energy in a professional sense, it's teaching and writing. Because I think that's the most leveraged way that I can do anything in life.
Yeah, you have an extensive background in economic development, and I guess you pride yourself as a professor, as a teacher, someone who's bringing that knowledge that we need. But I hear you say the diversity of your classroom, and as I listen, I hear that there may be some lack in our participation in economic development. Is that what you're...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that when we're talking about positive sum versus zero sum, every community, every state, every regional block of states in America is in competition with all others. So we see it as zero sum. It's like we chased the Amazon second headquarters, and people were willing to put, literally billions of dollars on the table to land that project. So, it becomes, there's only one place that wins under that model of economic development. So what could we do differently? Well, we could work together. And I think communities are working together within regions. We've seen progress in that. I think communities and regions working with states, state government, state nonprofits that are in the economic development business. We're doing a better job of that. And that leads to more positive sum results.
Yes.
And that's better for the American dream. It's more efficient, and we're not stumbling over each other for that single one opportunity, but we're really trying to gear opportunities to communities and regions and saying, this is really what you're good at. You've got a workforce that's geared to this. You've got natural resources, which now mean tourism for lots of people, because, you said you're in upstate New York. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Beautiful place. There's so much beauty. So people want to be around that. That's an asset for economic development. It's tourism.
Yes. So the role of economic development in our community, not just macro, but micro, it's going to play a great role in advancing the American dream today?
Yes, and I think it has already. And I think if I look back, I think I mentioned earlier, I've worked in this field for 4 decades. So I go back to the late 1970s. And we've seen a lot of different economies since then. That was a period of time when we were seeing a decline in what you would call, core manufacturing, whether it was automotive or metal working equipment. But many of those industries basically died. And so there was a lot of pressure that was put on communities, regions, and states to diversify their economy. I think those that were really smart put a great emphasis on entrepreneurship, especially helping young people develop that mindset that they wanted to have a business of their own, that they were creating something with their own life force energy and their resources to do that, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just going to go out and recruit the next smokestack. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah.
But I've worked in a lot of very diverse communities. I worked in Benton Harbor, Michigan. I've worked in East St. Louis. I mentioned East Cleveland a while back. I worked in Youngstown. I worked in Northwest Pennsylvania. Lots of communities that have been, frankly, left behind. And that's the trouble, is that the new comes at the expense of the old. So somehow we've got to figure out, as Europe has for years. I mean, look at how the various European countries, whether it's Germany or France, you know, they basically concentrated growth. They work on redevelopment, reuse. We've been in this whole growth machine that basically moves opportunities to new places, and we leave people behind.
Wow. What have you learned from your diverse experience? I've heard you mention a few times that, you know, you work with a lot of different or diverse communities. What is the most important lesson that you've learned from this community? I see that you've seen how devastated it is for the community to be totally abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
And how, you know, and you have a strategy or you have a plan in place for this country moving in a better and more forward and more win-win situation.
Yes.
So what have you learned from all of this?
Well, I think that you have to start with people. Education, I think, is incredibly important. And I'm not just talking about the number of degrees that people have, but I'm talking about their preparation so that they are ready to assume a higher skill, higher paid job.
Yes.
You know, we've not done enough in that whole area, but I think the educational foundation is so important. An educated populace is the foundation for everything.
Yes.
But somehow we have to breathe into people open-mindedness and respect for differences.
Yes.
And all the fundamental things that, you know, basically have led us to be racist and have led us to basically allow, you know, all kinds of things, you know, our social status based upon ethnicity, family roots, the blue blood kind of, my family came over on the Mayflower kind of thing, that, you know, that's still in place. So that's where I think we've got to really change how we see the world. You could call that consciousness. We need a new consciousness, a new economic and social consciousness. And I don't think that, you know, right now we're not able to do that. We don't have the leadership for it. And I don't think, sadly, that Joe Biden or Donald Trump can do what we need in bringing people together. I don't think either one of them can do that. I think probably Joe Biden is better able to do it. But unfortunately, he keeps looking to government for answers, which my moderative conservative perspective says, I want to empower people in communities, schools, businesses to do these things, as opposed to just creating a bigger government agency that takes care of these things. Because as I said, we have a $35 trillion debt, and we've got to deal with that. But I think that we need a new brand of leadership. I did an interview in Iowa. Today is Friday. It must have been on Monday. And, you know, I remembered working with a governor, and his name is Terry Branstad, who was the governor of Iowa. He was the longest standing governor in American history. But, you know, he's a fairly conservative guy, but this guy is just an amazing human being. I'm thinking, well, why didn't the Republicans recruit a Terry Branstad who actually understood people at the local level, farmers in Iowa, you know, factory workers, but, you know, an incredibly astute politician, built bridges, did things in Iowa that are just remarkable. I mean, Iowa is an incredibly well-educated state. It really is. But I think we need new blood. You know, there have been a lot of names mentioned. You know, whether it's Governor Whitmire from Michigan as a candidate to, you know, step in, but, you know, I mean, the most likely that we're hearing is our vice president right now, Kamala Harris, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I had to pick somebody, I would love to see Michelle Obama step up.
You know,
I would have loved to seen that a long time ago, even when Joe Biden stepped up.
but I think that is wishful thinking for us because we don't have we would like to think that the nation will support that, but we are at such a crossroad in such a time as this where it would be polarized again, I believe,
Mm.
because we are not there yet. And we want to think that we have moved ahead, but we're still, racism is still so strong in our country that it has led us to here. It
Yeah.
was because I believe, because one of the main reasons we're in this situation is because we had a Black president.
Yeah.
So now to have a Black woman in the race, we are going to just further either polarize. It sounds really, wonderful because she is a strong leader.
Yeah.
We've seen that she's smart. She knows what she's talking about and she's inclusive. She has a vision. When she was out there with her husband, she had a vision that was propelling more women to go into business, and we admired that. I saw myself as a Michelle Obama. I admired her and made some shifts in my life and changed some of the habits that I had. Like she would get up and exercise early in the morning. I switched everything so I can include exercise into my daily regimen. And she also taught a lot of women that you are important, your dreams are important, and it doesn't, this is the time that you can step up and learn more and be more and become more. So it was a beautiful time, and I don't think that time has passed, but I think that the world that we live in, this country would not be so accepting of a Black and female. Oh God, it would be
well,
very tough to sell.
I think you raise a very well taken point. I think it's still worth trying. I agree with you that there are so many things working against a Michelle Obama and even a Kamala Harris, but I think that it's just important. But I think here's where I think if we actually created a third force, a third political party,
Mm-hmm.
that would actually move more people out of these two extremes, and so that they actually could listen to each other. They may not readily understand and accept what the two sides are saying, but I think they would be better able to hear what's on the other side.
Yes.
But it's so a lot of people have asked me this question. So are you optimistic about America? And I am, mostly because I was born that way, and that's the determination that's been built in me from the time I was a little kid. That the American dream worked for my grandfather. He came over here from Italy at the age of 15 in 1904, and the American dream worked for him, worked for my dad, worked for me. So far, it's working pretty well for my two sons, who are both professionals. But, I worry about them, and I worry about my three grandsons. I worry a lot about them. And that's something you brought up earlier.
Yes, because I have children and grandchildren, and we talk about what your book is about, the crossroads, where we are right now, and
Yeah.
how not so empowered we are. I don't feel that, empowerment that I once felt, but I do feel like the American dream worked for me. I came from Jamaica, West Indies. I was an orphan child. I lived with my mother and father, left when I was little, and I came up. I'm a doctor of nursing practice. I became a registered nurse. The education system gave me the keys to the success that I have today. The education and the entrepreneurial system, I use that to be where I am today. But I see my children struggling. I see that, where we have this beautiful home, $500,000 in this area cannot give you a beautiful home. If we were to buy a $500,000 home in this neighborhood, you better have another $200,000 to fix it up so that you can live in it. And so I see them struggling to attain the American dream. And I realize that, like you said, the economic shift is imbalance.
Yeah.
And there needs to be something that we do about it. But who are we going to choose to be our leader, to help us to lead our future, lead our children's future into attaining, easier for them to attain the American dream? Who can we trust? And do you think the American people really care? Or do you think Americans really care about the issues, or do they care more about their partisans' affiliation and which horse they want to win in this race?
Well, you've hit the core question, and I think my answer is that we care about our partisanship and our beliefs more than we do about the issues that we face.
That's sad. Because
well, that's why my book is, I think, important, because it talks a lot in a very readable way about the issues. I talk about social and economic mobility, and I illustrate it through data, but I make it very understandable. And each of the 12 recommendations that I make in terms of the 12-part strategy, they're pretty clear. There's no confusion about, well, what's this guy talking about? No, he's talking about the fact that we need to rein in special interest lobbying and stop people from being able to throw $100 million into somebody's campaign through some nonprofit that doesn't have to report where the money came from. That's not right.
You basically bought the campaign. You bought your leader. They're going to do what you say.
Well, that's the problem with seeing government as business. I teach business school, right? Okay. Yeah. Background economic development. So, I do believe in all these institutions. A business is an institution, but you cannot run government as a business. You can establish partnerships between government and business. Mm-hmm. You can privatize certain things by contract. We've done that with wastewater treatment plants and a variety of other things over the years. But I think the time when you come in and you say we're going to suddenly run this as a business, well, first of all, somebody's going to profit right off the top.
If it's a business, yeah,
it's a business. And so the other part of it is that we put democracy in jeopardy because this government exists to serve everyone, all of us, not just the people that are putting $100 million into, the president's campaign fund.
Yes.
That's what we have to stop. There's really no new ideas in those 12 points. They have, but nobody has really put them together as a package and said, this is what we need to do as a system of action. And I don't really, I talk to Republicans and Democrats, people that are on the Trump campaign, people that are on the Biden campaign. And I tell them the same thing. They say, well, does your book prefer one or the other? And I said, no. I said, all I care about is the American dream, that we use that as a focal point to bring people together, and that people embrace the agenda, this 12-point action plan. And so, I don't tell Republicans or Democrats a different story on that. I do not.
Yeah. We've lost so much already because we weren't paying attention. So thank you so much for putting together, sitting down, taking the time at this crossroad, at this pivotal time to write this book. It is important. What do you want readers to take away, and what action do you want them to take next?
So what I would love is if people would go up to my website and have a conversation with me about the 10 questions I posed about the book.
Yes.
That's available on my website, which is Donald Iannone, DonaldIannone.com. And it's under the blog section of the website. And just let's talk about those 10 questions, because they size up the book, and that's the most immediate way that I can engage people. Do I want people to buy the book? Absolutely. It's available as an ebook. It's available as a print book. But, you know, I'm open to going out and talking, working with people.
Yeah.
I'll take my tie off. You know, and so I'm willing to come out to different communities and talk and work with groups who actually embrace these ideas and say, okay, how can I help you do this? I'll roll my sleeves up. I mean, that's honestly what I would love to do. Yeah.
I think, you know, thank you so much. I think that is the least we could do. The least we could do. There's so much at stake and so much that we have lost already. I'm a woman, and I remember when I was pregnant, I got pregnant at 15 years old.
Wow.
And I had a choice whether I was going to have a baby at 15 or 16 years old. And I had a choice, you know, regardless of what I chose to do, it was still a choice. I was presented with a choice. And I can't believe that I now live in a country, in the same country, in the same vicinity, and my daughter doesn't or will, her choice is at risk.
Yes.
In this same America.
Yes.
And that is appalling to me. So guys, we have lost a lot already. What more are you willing to lose? What more are you willing to give up? Because it's really about that.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I couldn't agree more.
You know, I thank you. So I wish we could stay and talk forever.
Well, let me tell you that I admire you. I can tell you that you are a great person, and the work that you're doing through this podcast, and I'm sure lots of other things. Keep it on. Keep going. You know, plug on with this, because it's really worthwhile. And what you've done with your life, I mean, my God, that's just a wonderful success story.
Thank you.
It is.
Thank you very much. And that I am who I am in part because of where I live. I live here in America, and I would love for my children, my grandchildren, 100 years from now, the generations, the seed that come from me, have this beautiful place, this wonderful country that has given so much. Of course, we're not perfect. I'm not saying we're perfect, okay? But I'm saying that I've been able to attain and acquire a lot because of, in part, because of where I am, where I've lived since I was 13 years old. So I would love for the future of our country to continue to get better. So
would I.
Yes. So thank you for this book. I love to, I have 3 questions that I love to ask all of my guests, and I'm not going to leave you out. So please tell me, what's one bold promise that you can share with the audience today?
Bold promise is that I'm going to put legs on this book, and I'm going to go out and communicate about it and help other people understand it and make sense in their own way. Okay?
Yes.
That's a promise.
So here's what you can do as a listener to this podcast. You can share this podcast with a friend who is on the fence, who doesn't know what to think at this time. Share this podcast so they can, you know, get a better understanding of where we are in our country at this time.
Yeah.
Now, what is a bold statement that you can share with the audience that will cause a paradigm shift?
So that statement is that I think we have to deal with the crisis that we have at hand. We don't see it as an end. We see it as a new beginning. and that we're willing to transform ourselves, and we're willing to get involved in the political process and stand up for what we believe and make democracy and freedom work for all of us. So that's really what I think is so essential. And it is very bold. So what does bold mean to me? It's innovative, but it's grounded in ethics, courage, and it's an unending thing. I mean, boldness, and I think you and I probably share a lot in common in terms of boldness, of really wanting to be a change maker and make a difference, but mostly just to excite other people and get them to do things.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. What's a bold move that you would like to make in the future?
Well, I continue to reinvent myself. At 73, basically, I've gone through a lot of different wonderful experiences, but you know, I need to stay on the path. I need to learn how to age well, because there's consequences to pay for doing that. But I think that that's important. So balance needs to be more important. My wife tells me this every day. I listen sometimes. So yeah, but you're doing a great thing. Thank you for doing it. Really.
Thank you. If anyone out there is listening and you're interested in writing a book, please send me an email at authordnicholson@gmail.com. I can help you get your book idea out of your head and onto paper so that you can become a published best-selling author. And if you already have a book, please come and share your perspective, your message to our audience. Send me an email, authordnicholson@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and please share, like, and share. This is important time in our history. Please listen to this and share this message with someone else. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Bold Book of the Day with Dr. Denise Nicholson, a central hub and a safe space for authors to share their stories. Follow Dr. Denise on Facebook and Instagram at Denise Nicholson, or go to denisenicholson.com. Remember, no one can share your story better than you.